I stood alone in the church courtyard, watching the final preparations for my son's wedding, when everything changed. The warm afternoon sun felt pleasant against my face, but I barely noticed it. I was thinking about Nolan, about how proud I was of the man he'd become. 29 years old, successful in his career, kind to everyone he met. His mother would have been so proud. "Glenn!" my brother Samuel called from across the lawn. "You doing all right?" I nodded, forcing a smile. Samuel had driven 4 hours to be here. He was the only family I had left besides Nolan. My wife had passed 3 years ago, and since then, it had just been the two of us navigating life together. "Just taking it all in," I said. Samuel studied my face with concern. "Something feels off about this whole thing. Can't put my finger on it." I wanted to tell him he was imagining things, but I couldn't. Because I felt it too. The entire wedding planning process had been strange. Marissa, my future daughter-in-law, had taken control of everything, every decision, every detail, and somehow I'd been pushed further and further to the margins. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. "It's her day," I said finally. "She wants it perfect." "It's Nolan's day, too," Samuel pointed out. "And yours. You're his father." I looked toward the reception hall where workers were setting up tables and chairs. White linens, crystal glasses, flowers everywhere. It must have cost a fortune. I'd offered to contribute, of course. I'd saved money for this moment, but Marissa's mother had looked at me like I'd suggested something offensive. "We have it covered," she'd said coldly. "We don't need your help." The words had stung more than I'd admitted to anyone. I walked toward the florist tent where bridesmaids were gathered around buckets of roses and lilies. They wore matching robes with their names embroidered on the back. Talia, Marissa's closest friend, stood at the center giving orders like a general commanding troops. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "Do you need any help carrying things inside?" Talia glanced at me, then looked away. "We're good." The other bridesmaids giggled. One of them whispered something I couldn't hear, but I caught the tone. Mocking, dismissive. I backed away, feeling foolish. I was 54 years old, and these women in their 20s made me feel like I was intruding on something that wasn't meant for me. I found Nolan in the groom's waiting room, adjusting his tie in front of a mirror. His hands were shaking slightly. Nervous energy. "Hey, Dad," he said, breaking into a genuine smile. "Can you believe this is actually happening?" I handed him a bottle of water I'd brought from the car. "You look good, son. Really good." He took the water gratefully. "Thanks. I'm so glad you're here." Wouldn't miss it for anything. Before I could say more, 3 bridesmaids burst through the door without knocking. They barely acknowledged me. "Nolan, Marissa needs you to review the vow timing again," one of them said. "She's worried you'll talk too long." "I practiced it exactly as she asked," Nolan said, confused. "Just go over it again," the bridesmaid insisted. Then she noticed me standing there. "Oh, we didn't realize you were still here." Still here, like I was lingering somewhere I didn't belong. Nolan didn't seem to notice the slight. He was too focused on making sure everything went perfectly for Marissa. After they left, I walked back outside. The florist was unloading another van, and as I approached to offer help again, she turned and looked startled. "Oh, I thought you were the delivery driver," she said. "We've been expecting supplies." From behind me, I heard laughter. Talia and 2 other bridesmaids had witnessed the whole exchange. "That's the groom's dad," one of them whispered loudly. "Poor guy. He doesn't really fit in here, does he?" More laughter. I kept my expression steady and walked away. My suit was 10 years old, fitted for my wife's farewell service. I hadn't considered buying a new one. Maybe I should have. Maybe they were right to think I didn't quite fit in. I found myself near the church kitchen where catering staff were preparing appetizers. They worked quickly, arranging trays with precision. I stepped inside, drawn by the familiar smell of cooking food. Two servers stood by the industrial sink, talking in low voices. "Have you met the bride yet?" one asked. "Yeah, she's intense. Very specific about everything." "Specific is one word for it," the first server replied. "She snapped at Roberto 3 times about the napkin folding. 3 times. I heard she made the photographer cry during the engagement shoot." They noticed me then and immediately stopped talking. I nodded politely and left. Outside, I sat on a bench in the courtyard, hidden partially by a large oak tree. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the manicured grass. Guests were starting to arrive, parking their expensive cars in neat rows. I thought about the past 6 months. The engagement party, where Marissa had seated me at a table far from the family. The dress fittings I wasn't invited to. The rehearsal dinner where her father gave a long speech about how proud he was, while I sat silent, never asked to say a word. Nolan had tried to include me. "Dad, you should say something too," he'd suggested. But Marissa had touched his arm gently. "We don't want the night to run too long, babe. Let's keep it tight." So I'd stayed quiet. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Marissa wants to speak to you before the ceremony. Meet her in the garden behind the dressing rooms in 10 minutes. I stared at the message, wondering what she could possibly want from me now. I stood and brushed off my suit. Whatever was coming, I'd face it the way I faced everything else. Calmly, quietly, without making waves. I had no idea that in less than an hour, everything would change. That the quiet father everyone overlooked would become someone they'd never forget. I walked toward the garden, my steps steady, my mind clear. And that's when I heard them. The garden was breathtaking, almost unreal in its perfection. White roses curved along the pathways in full bloom, their petals soft as silk, and jasmine vines clung to trellises, releasing a sweetness that drifted lazily on the warm air. Stone pillars wrapped in thick, mature ivy created secluded alcoves where guests could slip away for quiet conversations. Classical music floated from carefully hidden speakers, blending so naturally with the scenery it felt like the garden itself was humming. I followed the side path toward the dressing room area, expecting to find Marissa waiting for me, maybe adjusting her dress or rehearsing one of her polished smiles. Instead, before I even turned the corner, I heard voices, female voices, light, careless, laughing. I stopped. "God, I can't believe you're actually going through with it," Talia said. Her voice carried through the evening air as if the garden itself wanted me to hear. "Why wouldn't I?" Marissa replied, confident, amused, completely unbothered. "Because you've complained about him constantly for the past year." A ripple of laughter followed, more than just the two of them, a whole circle of women, relaxed and unguarded. "He's nice enough," Marissa continued. "Stable. Good job, decent income, not bad looking. But honestly, the whole thing is exhausting. I should have kept walking, should have cleared my throat, made some noise, announced myself like any decent man would. Instead, I stood perfectly still behind one of the ivy-covered pillars, hidden in the shade, listening in spite of myself. "Then why marry him?" another voice asked. "Because it's an upgrade," Marissa said, as easily as someone commenting on a new appliance. "From where I was to where I'll be. It's worth it. His family has connections, his job has benefits, and once we're married, I can start making real changes." "Changes?" someone echoed. "Yeah, I already have plans for the house, new furniture, new car, maybe steer him into a career that's more prestigious. He's way too comfortable where he is." "What if he doesn't want to change?" Talia asked. "Oh, he will," Marissa said with a dismissive laugh. "He does everything I ask. He's completely devoted. It's actually kind of pathetic, but useful." My heart thudded so violently against my ribs, I half expected the ivy to tremble with it. "And the dad?" someone asked. "Glenn, he seems sweet." "He's useless," Marissa replied immediately, her tone turning sharp. "I kept him out of all the planning on purpose. The last thing I needed was his outdated opinions. He barely has money to contribute anyway. Nolan told me he offered, and I just had my mom shut that down." "That's harsh," Talia said, but she laughed as she said it. "It's practical," Marissa said. "After today, I'll make sure Nolan keeps distance from him. We don't need that kind of energy around us, old, boring, stuck in the past. We're building something new, and Glenn doesn't fit into that picture." I felt something inside me fracture. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, a core of clarity forming deep and unmoving. "You're terrible," a bridesmaid teased affectionately. "I'm realistic," Marissa corrected. "Look, sleeping with Nolan isn't exactly thrilling. The man has the personality of a golden retriever, but I can work with that. Train it, shape it into something better, and in the meantime, I get security, status, and a solid foundation to build the rest of my life on." "Does he know you feel like this?" someone asked softly. "Of course not," she scoffed. "And he never will. Nolan sees what I want him to see. A loving fiancé who absolutely adores him." She paused. "Speaking of which, I need to find his dad and make sure he understands his place today. Can't have him hovering like some lost puppy during the ceremony." My foot shifted against the stone path, snapping a small twig. The conversation stopped instantly. "Did you hear something?" Talia whispered. I stepped out from behind the pillar, careful to keep my face neutral. "Glenn!" Marissa exclaimed, and in an instant, her entire demeanor transformed. Her eyes brightened, her smile warmed, her posture softened. "There you are. I was just about to come find you." The other women looked at me, their expressions ranging from startled to guilty. "How long have you been standing there?" Talia asked. "Just arrived," I lied with practiced ease. "You wanted to speak with me?" Marissa's eyes searched my face for any crack in the mask, any hint of what I might have heard. I kept my expression open, mild, the same one I'd worn countless times in her presence. "Yes," she said at last. "I just wanted to tell you how much it means to have you here. Nolan loves you dearly, and I want you to know you're an important part of our family." The performance was flawless. If not for what I'd heard, I would have believed every word. "That's kind of you," I murmured. "And I hate to ask, but during the ceremony, could you sit in the third row instead of the first? We need the front row for my grandparents, with limited space." "Of course," I said immediately. "Whatever you need." Relief washed over her face. "You're the best, really. Thank you for understanding." I nodded, turned, and walked away. My steps were even and controlled, but inside, the fault line that had cracked moments earlier now ran straight through me. I found the restroom near the sanctuary, stepped inside, and locked the door. The silence was deafening. I looked into the mirror. The face staring back was the same face I'd shaved that morning, the same face that had watched my wife slip away, the same face that had raised Nolan on its own. But in my eyes, something new had settled, something cold and steady, steel. I washed my hands slowly, deliberately. Marissa didn't love my son. She didn't respect him. She didn't even see him as a human being, just a project, a tool. And she had every intention of cutting me out of his life the moment the ink dried. I dried my hands, reached for my phone, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name. Reverend Clark, personal. He'd known my family for 15 years. He'd buried my wife. He'd mentored Nolan through the roughest parts of adolescence. And today, he would be the one making this marriage official. I stared at his name, then glanced at the time. A calendar notification slid across my screen. Marriage license finalization today at ceremony start. I remembered his explanation from 2 weeks earlier, the legal sequence, the paperwork, the exact moment everything became binding. My finger hovered over the call button, then I pressed it. "Glenn?" Clark answered immediately. "Everything all right?" "I need to speak with you," I said softly. "Before the ceremony. It's important." A pause. "How important?" "Very." "I'll be in my office in 5 minutes," he said. "Come alone." I ended the call and looked once more at the man in the mirror. The quiet, overlooked father they all dismissed was no longer standing there. Someone else was. I unlocked the door and stepped back into the hallway, walking toward the church office with a calm I didn't fully understand, my mind already constructing what would happen next. The church office was small and comfortable, lined with theological books and family photos of clergy from decades past. Reverend Clark sat behind his desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his expression concerned. "Sit down, Glenn," he said gently. "Talk to me." I sat and spoke clearly, telling him everything I'd overheard, every word Marissa had said, every cruel observation, every calculated manipulation. Clark listened without interrupting, his face growing more troubled with each sentence. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "You're absolutely certain about what you heard?" he asked. "Completely. And you're not misinterpreting her meaning? Sometimes stress makes people say things they don't mean." "She wasn't stressed," I said. "She was bragging." Clark stood and walked to his window, looking out at the church grounds where guests were gathering. "Glenn, what you're describing, if it's true, this woman is entering marriage under false pretenses. She's deceiving your son. I know. But you understand what you're asking me to do?" "I'm not asking you to do anything," I said carefully. "I'm informing you, as the officiant, of information that's relevant to the ceremony you're about to perform." He turned to face me. "There are clauses, discretionary powers given to clergy in situations where continuing would be morally questionable. But using them is serious, Glenn. It will cause a scene. It will humiliate people. It will destroy this wedding. And letting it continue will destroy my son," I replied quietly. We stood in silence for a long moment. "You've never asked me for anything in all these years," Clark said finally. "Not even during the darkest days after your wife passed. You've always handled everything alone, with dignity and grace." He paused. "So when you come to me now, like this, I have to believe you're serious." "I am." He nodded slowly. "Then here's what I need you to do. When I reach the moment in the ceremony where I ask if anyone has objections, I need you to speak up, clearly and loudly enough for everyone to hear. Can you do that?" "Yes." "And you understand that once you do, there's no going back. The entire wedding will halt. Everyone will know what you've said. The consequences will be severe." "I understand." Clark walked back to his desk and pulled out a thick binder. He flipped through pages until he found what he was looking for. "According to our denomination's guidelines and state law, if the officiant has reasonable belief that one party is entering marriage under false pretenses or coercion, the ceremony can be stopped. The objection clause exists specifically for this purpose." He looked at me seriously. "But Glenn, I need you to be sure. Once this happens, relationships will break. Your son might hate you. People will talk about this for years." "If I stay silent, I lose him anyway," I said. "Marissa made that clear. She wants me out of his life. At least this way, he has a chance to see the truth before it's too late." Clark studied my face, then slowly nodded. "All right. When I ask for objections, speak up. I'll take it from there." I stood to leave, but he stopped me. "Glenn, I'm sorry you have to do this. I'm sorry it came to this." "So am I," said honestly. I left the office and walked through the church corridors. The hallways were empty now, everyone either in the sanctuary or making final preparations. My footsteps echoed on the polished floor. I climbed the stairs to the choir loft, a balcony area overlooking the sanctuary from above. From here, I could see everything. The pews filling with guests in expensive clothes, the flowers arranged perfectly at the altar, the musicians tuning their instruments. It was beautiful. Everything Marissa had planned was absolutely beautiful. And it was all built on lies. I pulled out my phone and found a message from Clark. "Meet me before they walk you down the aisle." Down below, I could see Nolan standing near the altar with his best man, adjusting his boutonniere nervously. He looked happy, excited, completely unaware of what was coming. My phone buzzed again. "Samuel. Where are you? Ceremony starts in 20 minutes. I texted back. "Be there soon." I watched from above as Marissa's parents entered, taking their seats in the front row. Her mother wore diamonds that probably cost more than my car. Her father looked proud and satisfied. Talia and the other bridesmaids filed in, giggling amongst themselves. They looked like they'd already forgotten our encounter in the garden, or maybe they assumed I hadn't heard anything important. The guests kept coming. Friends, family, colleagues, people who would witness what I was about to do. I descended from the choir loft and made my way toward the vestibule, the main corridor connecting the church entrance to the sanctuary. This was where the wedding party would line up before the processional. I found Samuel waiting there, looking worried. "Where have you been?" he asked. "You missed the photos." "I was handling something," I said. He studied my face. "You look different. What happened?" "I'll tell you later," I promised. Before he could press further, Marissa appeared at the end of the corridor. She wore her wedding dress, a stunning creation of lace and silk that must have cost thousands. She looked like something from a magazine cover. She walked directly toward me, her expression unreadable. "Glenn," she said sweetly, "can I have a moment?" Samuel glanced between us, confused, but stepped away. Marissa moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "I don't know what you think you heard earlier," she said, "but I want to be very clear. If you do anything, and I mean anything, to ruin this day, I will make sure Nolan never speaks to you again. Do you understand? I'll tell him you tried to sabotage our marriage out of jealousy. I'll paint you as the bitter old man who couldn't stand to see his son happy, and he'll believe me." She smiled, her teeth perfectly white. "So, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're planning, I suggest you let it go. Sit quietly, watch the ceremony, and accept your place in this family, which is nowhere." I looked at her calmly, my voice just as quiet as hers. "Okay," I said simply. She blinked, surprised by the easy agreement. "Really?" she asked suspiciously. "Really," I confirmed. "I'll sit quietly and watch." She searched my face for any sign of deception, but I kept my expression neutral. Finally, she nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." She walked away, her dress trailing behind her like a white river. Samuel returned to my side. "What was that about?" "She wanted to make sure I knew my place," I said. "And where's that?" I looked toward the sanctuary doors where soft music had begun to play. "She's about to find out," I said quietly. Reverend Clark appeared from a side door, his ceremonial robes on, his expression serious. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. The musicians shifted to the processional music. Guests stood. The bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle, one by one, their smiles perfect. Nolan stood at the altar, his face bright with anticipation. Marissa took her father's arm at the back of the sanctuary. Clark whispered to me as I passed, "When I ask for objections, speak clearly." I took my seat, not in the third row where Marissa had tried to banish me. In the second row, right behind where I should have been in the first place. The music swelled. Every head turned toward the back of the church. and Marissa began her walk down the aisle. She moved down the aisle like she owned the room. No, like she owned the entire world. Her posture was flawless, head lifted just enough to project confidence without arrogance, shoulders back with effortless elegance, every step calculated to draw every glance, every sigh, every whispered compliment. The gown shimmered as it caught the light pouring through the stained glass windows overhead, scattering soft colors across the sanctuary and giving her an almost angelic glow. Guests gasped quietly. Some reached for tissues. Others clasped their hands to their hearts, swept up in the spectacle of beauty and ceremony. It was everything a wedding was supposed to be. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my face neutral. Marissa reached the altar and leaned in to kiss her father on the cheek. He looked proud, emotional, overwhelmed. He took his seat. She turned to Nolan with a dazzling smile, and Nolan looked at her as if his chest might burst. His eyes glistened, full of raw, unguarded affection, the kind of love that believed in forever. My heart fractured for him. Reverend Clark stepped forward, offering a warm, practiced smile to the congregation. "Please be seated." The sound of 300 people sitting at once echoed through the sanctuary like a single exhale. "Dearly beloved," Clark began, his voice steady and resonant, reaching every corner of the vaulted space. "We are gathered here today to witness the joining of Marissa and Nolan in holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted." The familiar cadence of his words wrapped the room in a sense of ceremony. He had spoken these lines hundreds of times, but never without meaning. He moved smoothly through the opening prayers, through the scriptural reading, through the blessing of the rings. At the altar, Nolan and Marissa stood facing one another, hands intertwined. Nolan looked overwhelmed with joy. Marissa looked perfect. "Marriage is a commitment to truth," Clark continued, "to honesty, to building a life together based on genuine love and respect." I watched closely. It requires both parties to come to this altar with pure intentions and honest hearts. Marissa's smile twitched, small, quick, almost imperceptible. But I saw it. The mask had slipped, if only for a heartbeat. "The vows you are about to take," Clark said, "are sacred promises. Promises made not only to each other, but before these witnesses and before the highest authority. These vows will bind you together for the rest of your days." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle like dust in the silence. "Which is why," he added gently, "before we proceed with the exchange of vows, I must ask the traditional question that ensures we move forward rightly." My pulse thudded in my ears. "If there is anyone present who knows of any lawful reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony," Clark said, "speak now, or forever hold your peace." A hush fell over the sanctuary, heavy, expectant, the kind of silence that holds its breath. 5 seconds. 10. I stood up. The sound of my movement cut through the silence like a blade. Heads turned, gasps rippled through the crowd. Nolan's face drained of color. Marissa's eyes went wide with shock, then immediately hardened with fury. "Glenn," Clark said, his tone carefully neutral. "Do you have something to say?" My voice came out steady and clear. "Yes, Reverend. I do." 300 people stared at me. I could feel their confusion, their anger at the disruption, their morbid curiosity about what could possibly be important enough to stop a wedding. "Please," Clark said. "Speak." I kept my eyes on Nolan, not on Marissa, on my son. "About an hour ago," I began, "I overheard a conversation in the garden behind the dressing rooms. Marissa was speaking with her bridesmaids." "This is absurd!" Marissa's mother shouted from the front row. "Reverend, you can't allow this!" Clark held up his hand. "Let him finish." I continued. "She said, and I quote, 'Sleeping with Nolan isn't exactly thrilling. The man has the personality of a golden retriever, but I can work with that, train it, shape it into something better. The sanctuary erupted, voices overlapping, people standing, bridesmaids gasping. "He's lying," Marissa shouted. "He's lying! Don't listen to him." But I wasn't finished. "She called me useless," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "She said she made sure to keep me out of the planning because she didn't want my outdated opinions. She said that after today, she'd make sure you kept distance from me, Nolan, that I didn't fit into the life she was building for you." Nolan stood frozen at the altar, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. "She told her friends that marrying you was an upgrade," I continued, "that you were stable and useful, that she had plans to change everything about you, your career, your life, once the marriage was official. She called you devoted and pathetic in the same breath." "Stop it!" Marissa screamed. "Stop it! He's lying. He's a bitter old man who can't stand to see his son happy." She turned to Nolan, grabbing his hands. "Baby, you know me. You know I love you. He's making this up because he's always been jealous of us, of our relationship. Don't let him do this." Nolan pulled his hands away slowly. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "Of course not." "Is it true?" Marissa's face twisted. "You're seriously going to believe him over me? On our wedding day?" "I asked you a question," Nolan said, and his voice had gone very cold. Reverend Clark stepped forward. "Glenn, I need to ask you directly. Did you inform me of this conversation immediately after you heard it?" "Yes," I said, "about 40 minutes ago in your office." Clark nodded solemnly. "And I can confirm," he said, addressing the room, "that Glenn came to me with this information in clear distress. He asked me, as his minister, what his responsibilities were regarding what he had overheard. I advised him that if he had legitimate concerns about either party entering this marriage under false pretenses, then morally and legally, he was obligated to speak during the objection clause." A murmur rippled through the pews. Clark lifted a hand, steadying the room. "Furthermore, according to both church doctrine and state law, I have the authority to halt this ceremony if there is reasonable belief that either party is not entering this union with honest intentions." "This is ridiculous!" Marissa's father shot to his feet, red-faced. "We've paid for this entire event, this venue, this reception, this ceremony. You can't just stop it because some man claims he overheard something." "I can, actually," Clark replied, voice firm and uncompromising. "And I am." He turned his full attention to Marissa, his expression softening only slightly. "Young lady, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've married high school sweethearts, people on their second chances, people in their 70s, and couples who probably shouldn't have been in the same zip code, let alone the same marriage license." He held her gaze. "And right now, your reaction is telling me everything I need to know." "My reaction?" Marissa's voice climbed sharply, brittle at the edges. "My reaction is because I'm being attacked, because my wedding is being sabotaged by lies." "Then answer your fiancé's question," Clark said neutrally. "Is what Glenn said true?" Silence descended over the sanctuary like a falling curtain. 300 people held their breath at once. Marissa looked wildly from face to face. Nolan, her parents, her bridesmaids, searching for someone to rescue her from the truth, now pressing in on all sides. But no one moved. Finally, she huffed out a breath. "I was venting," she said, attempting a dismissive wave. "That's all. Pre-wedding stress. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're stressed." "So you did say those things," Nolan said, his voice flat, drained of everything but hurt. "I was joking around with my friends," she insisted. "It didn't mean anything." Nolan swallowed hard. "You called me a golden retriever." "It was a joke. You said I had no personality." I wasn't serious." "You said sleeping with me wasn't thrilling." His voice wavered. "Those were jokes?" "Nolan, please." Did you mean them? He asked, each word sharp with betrayal. Marissa's mask slipped, only for a heartbeat, but enough to show everything beneath it. I meant, she snapped, that you could be more ambitious. I meant that you're comfortable with mediocrity when you could be so much more. I've been trying to push you to reach your potential. By calling me pathetic? He said, the word trembling as it left him. I didn't. She faltered, caught between pride and panic. Fine. Yes. Sometimes you are. Sometimes you're so passive and agreeable that it drives me crazy. But that's what relationships are about, isn't it? Helping each other grow? Becoming better together? Nolan stared at her, something in his expression collapsing. And my father? He asked quietly. You said he was useless, that you wanted him out of our lives. Marissa's face tightened with unfiltered irritation. He is useless. The words burst out of her before she could stop them. He's been hovering around this entire time, inserting himself where he doesn't belong, and yes, I wanted some distance because we're starting our own family and we don't need— Stop, Nolan said softly. His outdated ideas influencing every decision we— Stop! The shout cracked through the sanctuary like a lightning strike. People flinched. A few gasps echoed off the walls. Nolan stood rigid, chest rising and falling, staring at Marissa as if he were finally seeing her without the illusion she'd wrapped herself in. When I introduced you to my father, he said slowly, you hugged him. You called him Dad. You said you were grateful, so grateful to have him in your life. I was being polite, Marissa fired back. What was I supposed to say? Hi, nice to meet you, please stay out of our way. I was building a relationship with you, Nolan. That meant being nice to your baggage. The word hung in the air like poison. Baggage, Nolan repeated, voice hollow. The sanctuary was no longer a wedding venue. It had become a gallery of witnesses frozen in stunned silence. No one shifted. No one whispered. They simply watched the implosion of a celebration that had been moments away from becoming legally binding, and then collapsing into something beyond repair. Nolan turned to look at me, really look at me, and I saw the moment he understood everything, every dismissal I'd accepted, every slight I'd swallowed, every time I'd been pushed aside while he was too in love to notice. Dad, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I nodded slowly. I know, son. He turned back to Marissa. We're done. What? No. Nolan, we can work through this. Couples fight, couples have disagreements. This is just— We're done, he repeated. This wedding is over. He pulled off his boutonniere and dropped it on the altar. Then he walked down the aisle, past his groomsmen, past the shocked guests, straight toward me. He stopped in front of me, tears streaming down his face. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for being brave enough to do this. Then he kept walking, out of the sanctuary, into the vestibule, toward the exit. Samuel stood up and followed him without a word. Marissa stood at the altar, her perfect dress suddenly seeming like a costume. Her face had gone from shock to rage to something approaching understanding. She looked directly at me. You, she hissed. You did this. You destroyed everything. No, I said calmly. You did that all by yourself. I just made sure my son knew the truth before he made the biggest mistake of his life. I loved him, she screamed. No, Reverend Clark said quietly. You didn't, and that's why we're here. Marissa's mother rushed to her daughter's side, frantic and already making calls on her phone, as if a venue manager or coordinator could somehow undo what had just unfolded in front of 300 witnesses. Her voice was sharp, clipped, urgent, damage control in heels. Her father stood rigid beside her, face flushed a deep, angry red, veins prominent along his neck. He barked orders at anyone within earshot, demanding to speak with someone about contracts, refunds, deposits, anything he could control, now that the one thing he truly wanted to control had slipped through his fingers. Talia and the other bridesmaids clustered together in a tight, trembling knot near the front pews. Some of them were crying openly, mascara streaking their cheeks. Others whispered frantically behind their manicured hands, replaying every detail they'd just witnessed, calculating how the story would spread. And the guests, oh the guests, began filing out slowly, each one wearing a different version of the same expression: shock, discomfort, thinly veiled fascination. For some, this was a tragedy. For others, the highlight of their year. This would become lore in their circles. A wedding that combusted at the altar, a groom betrayed, a bride exposed, and a quiet father with one calm objection that toppled everything. I remained in the sanctuary as the room emptied around me, the sudden quiet almost overwhelming. The weight of what I'd done pressed against my shoulders. Not regret, not even doubt, but the gravity of truth spoken out loud. Reverend Clark approached, his expression gentler than before. "Are you all right, Glenn?" "I will be," I said. "You know," he continued carefully, "there will be fallout from this. People judge what they don't understand. Some will say you should have swallowed the truth, stayed silent." "I know," I replied. Because I did. People preferred illusions, especially beautiful ones. He rested a steady hand on my shoulder. "But you did the right thing. You protected your son. That is what fathers do." I looked toward the altar, toward the chaos now swirling around Marissa. Her parents were flanking her on either side, arguing with coordinators, pointing fingers, searching for someone, anyone, to blame. The bridesmaids hovered uselessly. Voices overlapped in heated, frantic bursts. Marissa finally looked at me. Our eyes locked for a fraction of a second, and in that breath of time, the entire illusion fell away. I didn't see the charming young woman who'd smiled at family dinners. I didn't see the radiant bride in the shimmering gown. I saw the truth, bare, unmistakable, a person who lived on manipulation, calculation, and control, and who now faced the consequences of being caught in the open. I turned and walked out of the sanctuary. The afternoon sun met me with startling warmth as I stepped outside. The air felt cleaner, as if the suffocating weight of the ceremony had been lifted. It smelled like grass and pine and something else, freedom, maybe. I found Nolan sitting on the church steps, elbows on his knees, his head buried in his hands. Samuel stood a few feet away, giving him the illusion of privacy while refusing to leave him alone. I walked over and sat beside my son. For a long, heavy moment, neither of us said a word. The sounds of distant murmuring from the fleeing guests faded. The wind rustled the trees overhead. Finally, Nolan exhaled shakily. "I've been so foolish," he whispered. "No," I said gently. "You're human. You fell in love with who you believed she was. That isn't foolish. That takes heart. It takes hope." He lifted his head, eyes rimmed with red. "How long did you know?" "I suspected for months," I admitted, "but I didn't know for sure until about an hour ago." He let out a bitter laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "I should have seen it. The way she talked to you, the way she took over everything, I wanted so badly for it to work. I wanted—" His voice cracked. "I wanted to make Mom proud, to show her I could build a life, find someone, be happy." I placed a steady hand on his back. "Your mother would be prouder of you today than she ever was," I said, "because today you chose truth over comfort. You chose honesty over illusion. You chose yourself. That's courage, Nolan. Real courage." He wiped a tear with the heel of his palm. "I loved her, Dad. Even now, part of me still—" He couldn't finish. "I know," I said softly. "And that's all right. Love doesn't vanish just because someone betrays it. You're allowed to grieve the future you thought you were building." Samuel walked over and sat down on Nolan's other side. "For what it's worth, nephew," he said with a soft snort, I never liked her. Thought she was all surface and no substance. Nolan let out a broken laugh despite himself, leaning into his uncle's shoulder for the smallest moment, finally letting himself rest. Despite everything, Nolan laughed. A short, broken sound, but genuine. We sat there together, 3 generations of Warren men, watching guests stream past us to their cars. Some glared, some looked sympathetic. Most just looked uncomfortable. Marissa emerged from the church surrounded by her family and bridesmaids. Her dress was gathered in her arms, no longer flowing dramatically, but bunched up practically for walking. Her makeup had run slightly from angry tears. She saw us sitting there and stopped. For a moment, I thought she might say something, throw one final accusation or threat. Instead, she just stared at me with pure hatred, then climbed into a waiting limousine. The car pulled away, leaving behind only the scattered remnants of the day that never was. Flowers wilting in the heat, chairs arranged for a reception that wouldn't happen, a wedding arch that would never frame a kiss. "What happens now?" Nolan asked quietly. "Now we go home," I said. "We order pizza, we sit together, and we remember that family isn't about who we marry. It's about who stays when everything falls apart." Nolan nodded slowly. "Can I stay with you tonight? I can't face going back to the apartment yet." "You can stay as long as you need," I said. We stood up together, brushing off our formal clothes that suddenly felt ridiculous. Samuel pulled out his car keys. "I'll drive," he offered. "You both look exhausted." As we walked toward the parking lot, I glanced back at the church one final time. The beautiful building where my wife and I had married 30 years ago. Where we'd baptized Nolan as a baby. Where we'd said goodbye to her 3 years ago. And now, where I'd saved my son from making a terrible mistake. The quiet father everyone dismissed had spoken up at the exact right moment. And sometimes, that's what love looks like. Not grand gestures or perfect words, just the courage to tell the truth when it matters most, even when everyone wants you to stay silent. We drove away from the church as the sun began to set, 3 men in formal clothes eating pizza in a quiet living room, grateful for the family that remained when everything else was stripped away.